You have the intention to clean up your diet and to eat healthy, but then you sabotage yourself along the way, and you're not conscious enough to really see how you're damaging yourself because you have kind of different parts in your mind that are kind of fragmented and fighting against each other. You have like the higher self, the lower self, and stuff in between, and all of this needs to get reconciled. And it's this reconciliation process, which really is like a war. A war is raging in your mind in the same way that, you need to have a war in Europe in order to ultimately pacify Europe. To unify Europe required many, many wars. Europe is quite unified right now, but that's only because there have been like hundreds of wars in European history over the last couple thousand years that have ultimately led to this unification. And even now, it's not totally unified. There's parts of the European Union which are breaking off all the time. And there's rise of nationalist movements against the European Union right now. So it's very interesting to observe these dynamics happening out in the world socially with corporations and governments and political parties, but then to also notice the same stuff is happening inside of you, the same kind of dynamic. And then you see this kind of parallel between the collective level and the individual level, and it's very fascinating. But of course, all of this will just be theory when you're in the heat of the moment yourself. When you're actually suffering through it, all of this theory is going to fly out the window. None of it's going to really matter to you. So when you're really in it, that's where you want to build the mindfulness skills to be able to suffer through it mindfully, and just try to do the best you can. Try to love yourself. Try to be gentle on yourself. And then always remember that just because you failed to make a change doesn't really mean anything, because you can come back next week, next month, next year, and attempt to make the change again. Only this time, really, you'll be smarter, because every time you fail, every time you backslide, if you're mindful, if you backslide mindfully, then you will notice the various little sneaky maneuvers that your ego uses against you to keep yourself in homeostasis. You'll start to notice various like mental tricks and self-deception tactics, all those self-deception mechanisms that I talked about in my 3-part series about self-deception. You'll start to notice more and more of those. You'll start to notice all the smoke screens that your mind throws up, all the ways that it projects out onto the outside world, how it resists taking responsibility. And as you watch all of that, you start to notice just how sneaky this beast called ego is. It's pure sneakiness. It's pure devilry, pure trickery. That's all it is. And this is how the devil does his work, is through trickery, through sleight of hand. See my episode about what is the devil. See, so we're bringing in a lot of stuff together here. And now you start to really understand why life is so challenging. It's because of all the trickery that's involved, all the tricks that you play on yourself. And why life is a maze. See my episode about life is a maze. It's a maze because you're lost in the maze of your own mind. You're not sure how to distinguish your genuine motivations from the trickery that the devil in you throws up, which is the ego. And so you're trying to sort all this out. And that's why you have 80 years to live, is so you can sort through all this stuff. You need a lot of attempts. So don't get discouraged by this. Also, it's important to distinguish between states and stages of development. A state is like a peak experience that you have. And a lot of times what people do, especially when we're naive and we just get into self-development, is that we have a peak state, whether it's on a psychedelic or just on a meditation retreat or just in our life. We're feeling great, we're on top of the world. And then we just assume that, well, that state, it'll just lock in and that's how my life will be from now on. And it's never that way. It's much easier to attain a high state than it is to attain a high stage of development. This is a distinction that I got from Ken Wilber, the distinction between states and stages. A stage of development takes years of work to build. You have to work on it consistently. So even though as a newbie meditator, you could have a peak meditative state that goes very high and might even reach the depths of a Zen master. But you're not going to be at the Zen master's stage of development when it comes to meditation. Because for that, you would need to meditate for years and decades to be able to reach a sort of a baseline level of solid meditation abilities, right? Like any newbie can just get a little bit lucky here and there, can have a lucky break and things go right in their life. But it really takes a dedication to this path to be able to build sort of a solid stage of meditation ability or business skill or relationship skills or anything like that. So make that distinction and don't just get tricked and seduced by the high states. Because usually after a high state, what happens? Of course, you drop back down. If you noticed, after your greatest emotional highs in life, you usually end up feeling pretty low. And vice versa, after your lowest emotional lows in life, actually the next day, the next week, you can end up feeling pretty good. So that's also one way that I console myself when I'm in a bad mood or I'm feeling negative or something like that, is that I just remind myself that usually after my worst states of feeling, I will experience some of my best ones. And I will rise to a sort of a new level, a new stage will be reached if I can just suffer through this mindfully. And of course, I never am able to suffer through a situation fully mindfully. So don't be a perfectionist about it here. Because again, if you're perfectionistic about being mindful all the time of all your suffering, then of course you're always going to fall short of that. And that's just going to make you more miserable and more depressed.